She is the grief that broke the king of Thrace, General, not his daughter. A small, trembling scribe named Lydas whispered the words as the Thracian procession reached the forum gate. General Valerius Numa stopped, the bronze clang of the diplomatic chains echoing in the silence of the midday sun. The woman, Senator Calvus's new political prize, stood cloaked in white, a symbol of truce, her face serene and utterly impassive. Numa's centurions stiffened, hands dropping instantly to the pommels of their gladi. If the terrified scribe was right, Rome had not received a hostage to guarantee peace. They had willingly accepted a silent, volatile bomb intended to wound the Thracian king. Numa looked down at the scribe, the cold promise of execution already hardening his eyes. He had to know. What dangerous lie was hidden beneath the delicate veil of peace, and how close was it to ripping Rome apart? General Valerius Numa stood high on the granite balcony of the Praetorium, overlooking the northern sector of Rome. The morning chill barely touched him. Armor and authority offered a poor shield against the internal cold he carried. His routine was the empire's clock. Waking before the sun, dedicating the first hour to reviewing troop dispatches from the Rhine frontier, followed by a meticulous study of grain reserves. Today, however, the routine was broken by the arrival of the Thracian treaty. Numa, a man forged in 20 years of relentless campaigning, carried the scars of duty, deep, visible lines on his face and an unseen, constant tension in his shoulders. He was Dux Romanorum, the unwavering shield of the Republic, but that shield felt brittle this morning. His personal aide, Marius, a young man who moved with fearful efficiency, approached, bearing a scroll detailing the specifics of the new Thracian princess, Caelia. Numa dismissed him with a curt gesture, his focus shifting back to the scene below. The procession carrying the woman now turning towards the opulent estate of Senator Calvus, the very man who brokered this fragile peace. Calvus, Numa knew, was a politician of silken greed, valuing treaties only for the wealth and prestige they brought him. Numa valued peace only for the lives it saved. The core of Numa's power wasn't his rank, but his reputation for unyielding, brutal honesty. When he spoke, the Senate listened because his voice was the sound of legions marching. Yet that iron discipline concealed a persistent, aching guilt. 10 years prior, Numa had made a tactical decision during the Dacian campaign, a quick, brutal siege that saved his army but cost the lives of every civilian inside the city, including his own young cousin, Junius, who had foolishly followed the legions seeking glory. Numa had ordered the assault. Knowing Junius was within the walls, he had prioritized the survival of the greater force, adhering to the severe logic of Rome, yet the face of his cousin haunted the rare moments when he allowed himself sleep. He had sacrificed blood for duty, and Rome had praised the victory, but the weight of that choice had pulverized his capacity for personal joy. He picked up a piece of polished obsidian from his strategy table, its surface cold and dark. He saw his reflection, an aging general, his hair streaked with grey, his gaze perpetually fixed on the next threat. He had authority over legions, governors, and the very boundaries of the empire, yet he could not command the ghosts of his past to silence. The small scribe's warning echoed in the empty spaces of the Praetorium. She is the grief that broke the king of Thrace. Numa did not trust the treaty. He only trusted the sharp, undeniable logic of war. And if this Thracian woman was a wound, he needed to know where the poison was hidden before it spread through the heart of Rome. His duty was to peace, but his instinct screamed deception. The emperor demanded order. Numa would find the truth, even if it meant tearing the treaty and Calvus apart. The man was named Lysander, a servus publicus, a public slave, assigned to the administrative upkeep of the Senate archives. His world was dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, the rustle of papyri, and the relentless scratch of quills. His hands, permanently stained with ink and grime, moved slowly but with the precision born of exhaustion. Lysander was socially invisible, a fixture of the background, his existence defined by the lowliest tasks, cataloguing treaties, maintaining census rolls, and occasionally polishing the bronze plaques commemorating Roman victories. His life was a perpetual lean against the limits of his endurance. The archives were damp and cold, and the weight of history felt physical. He moved among the towering shelves, a thin man whose spirit was worn threadbare, but who held a quiet, fierce resolve. His only anchor was his daughter Elara, barely 7 years old, who lived in the narrow slave quarters beneath the archives. Elara was not strong. The Roman air, thick with illness and neglect, seemed to cling to her small frame. Lysander protected her with the ferocity of a caged animal, diverting scraps of food, hiding her from the gaze of the overseers, and teaching her to read using the broken fragments of damaged scrolls, a secret knowledge that could mean freedom or the lash. Today, Lysander felt a deeper tremor of unease than usual. Senator Calvus had personally overseen the filing of the Thracian treaty documents late yesterday, an unusual intrusion. While sorting the tabulae earlier, Lysander had noticed a discrepancy, a sliver of papyrus tucked deep within the official documentation. It was not part of the standard diplomatic seal. He had read it quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs, before hiding it again. The sliver contained 2 pieces of information: a detailed account of a small Thracian family lineage and the record of an execution that occurred 5 years ago during the border conflicts. An execution ordered by the Thracian king himself of a distant cousin. But the cousin's name was the same as the princess Calvus had just paraded through the city, Caelia. It was impossible. One Caelia was dead, the other was the key to peace. Lysander, the man who catalogued Rome's lies and truths daily, did not understand the full scope of the forgery. But he knew this. The document he held was a volatile contradiction. If the Princess Caelia was truly the executed cousin, then the woman who entered Rome today was not royalty, but a pawn trained for a singular, destructive purpose. He feared the consequences of silence, but feared the consequences of speaking even more. He knew he had seen a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the entire piece. Before the tension escalates, tell me, where are you watching from today? The 2 lives, one gilded by temporary power and the other choked by perpetual servitude, crossed not on marble streets, but within the meticulously ordered chaos of the archives. General Numa required immediate, precise confirmation of the treaty's terms, demanding the original sealed documents be brought to the Praetorium by nightfall. The task fell to Lysander. He arrived at the Praetorium just as the sun dipped below the city, bathing the general's headquarters in harsh orange light. Numa was not in the central reception hall. He was in a smaller, sparse antechamber, reviewing maps pinned to a field campaign board. Lysander, carrying the heavy bronze chest containing the treaty scrolls, was instructed to wait by the threshold. This was the first time Lysander had been this close to the general. Numa was an imposing shadow, his stillness more terrifying than any shouting. Lysander could feel the weight of the man's reputation, a pressure that squeezed the air from his lungs. He looked at the general's hands resting on the map, scarred, decisive hands that held the fate of nations. Numa glanced up, his eyes sharp and restless, sweeping over Lysander without truly seeing him, the way a powerful man views a piece of furniture. Lysander, meanwhile, studied the general, searching for the crack in the facade that the scribe had mentioned. He saw only duty, hard and polished. As Numa spoke to an accompanying centurion about troop rotations, the general absently moved a small, carved wooden soldier on the map. Lysander's attention snagged not on the general, but on the bronze chest in his own hands. Inside, beneath the genuine official scrolls, was the small folded slip of papyrus detailing the contradiction of Princess Caelia's lineage. Numa suddenly stopped talking, his head tilting slightly. He hadn't looked at Lysander, but he had sensed the interruption in the silence. Lysander felt a jolt of panic. He realized his breathing had hitched. The general's gaze finally settled on the slave, cold and impersonal. "Is there an issue, Servus?" Numa's voice was low, carrying the resonance of command. "None, General," Lysander managed, his voice a dry rasp. He bowed deeply, shielding the chest with his body. Numa nodded once, dismissing the interaction. But for that brief, charged moment, the proximity of the 2 men, the general wrestling with the moral truth of a war he barely escaped, and the slave wrestling with a political truth that could start another, had generated an invisible current. Numa felt a fleeting sense of wrongness, an unidentifiable disturbance in the atmosphere. quickly attributed to the exhaustion of dealing with Calvus's political maneuvering. Lysander, knowing the danger he carried, felt the true weight of the empire pressing down on him. Something was definitely about to spiral out of control. The moment passed, leaving behind a subtle shared tension. Lysander returned to the archives, the image of General Numa's relentless, weary face imprinted on his mind. He worked through the night, fueled by bitter wine and the fear for Ilara's safety. The contradiction on the hidden papyrus burned in his conscience. He needed proof that the woman, the treaty princess Caelia, was a fraud before Rome committed fully to the lie. The opportunity came unexpectedly 2 days later. Senator Calvus, hosting a minor public reception to showcase his new Thracian prize, requested that the archives send an experienced hand to retrieve a specific obscure map illustrating the contested Thracian border, a detail of pure political theatre. Lysander was sent. He stood against the marble pillars of Calvus's atrium, surrounded by the noise of sycophantic senators and the glitter of new wealth. He watched Caelia. She moved with practiced regal grace, accepting the forced pleasantries and political adoration with an air of distant melancholy. Everyone saw a beautiful, tragic queen sacrificing herself for peace. Lysander saw something else. He noticed the details that the privileged missed, the constant, almost imperceptible flick of her eyes towards the exit, the way her posture, while flawless, was held with the rigid tension of a warrior, not the soft compliance of a noble captive. Then the true signal appeared. A young slave girl, carrying a silver tray of candied figs, stumbled slightly near Caelia. The girl recovered quickly, but as she did, she spoke a quick apology. Not in Latin or Greek, but in a rapid, specific Thracian dialect common only to the northern mountain tribes, a dialect Lysander had painstakingly catalogued in ancient scrolls detailing military garrisons. Caelia's mask shattered for a microsecond. Her eyes narrowed, not in irritation, but in recognition, the fleeting spark of shared language igniting a fierce, suppressed emotion. But more than the recognition, Lysander noticed her hands. As Caelia reached out, seemingly to steady the tray, her thumb brushed the girl's wrist. It was not a gesture of comfort. Lysander, having once been a field medic's assistant before his capture, recognized the pressure point, a precise silent communication used to signal danger or rendezvous among spies or military units. It was a soldier's language, not a princess's. Caelia, the treaty, the peace, it was all a fabrication designed for a single deadly message. The woman was not just a hostage, she was an infiltrator, and she had just confirmed contact with an agent inside Calvus's own house. Fear turned to icy certainty in Lysander's gut. If he exposed the truth now, he would be crushed by Calvus's power and dismissed as a paranoid slave trying to derail a successful treaty. Yet, if he remained silent, the instability Caelia represented would erupt, likely leading to the deaths of thousands, including his daughter, swallowed by the inevitable chaos. He held the secret proof in the archives and carried the immediate visual proof of her treachery in his mind. He had to act, but he knew that approaching Numa, the rigid symbol of Roman law, would be like stepping onto a fractured glacier. The decision to move was agonizing, yet simple. Lysander understood that if Caelia was indeed a military asset, her mission was already underway. He could not risk Ilara's future on the dubious peace brokered by Calvus. He chose Numa, the embodiment of Roman severity, precisely because Numa valued the state's integrity above political convenience. That night, Lysander did not go to the slave quarters. He went back into the deepest recesses of the Senate archives. With shaking hands, he retrieved the slip of papyrus detailing the lineage contradiction, wrapping it tightly in a piece of oilcloth. He also took the single most dangerous item in the archives, a small sealed wax tablet containing Numa's own internal after-action report from the Dacian siege, detailing the fate of his cousin, Junius. This was Lysander's insurance, his fragile shield. If Numa dismissed the slave's word, the mention of Junius's fate, a wound Numa desperately hid, would guarantee the general's forced attention. It was blackmail, a gamble on Numa's fractured humanity. He crept out into the cold Roman darkness, navigating the back alleys, his worn leather sandals silent on the cobblestones. Reaching the Praetorium was impossible through the front gates. Instead, he targeted the secondary supply entrance, timing his arrival between the changing of the night watches. He found the centurion Numa trusted most, Centurion Cassius, overseeing the armory. Lysander, breathless and smeared with archive dust, approached him directly. "I need to speak to General Numa immediately. It concerns the Thracian treaty." "It is a deception," Lysander whispered, his urgency cutting through the quiet military efficiency. Cassius, heavy-lidded and weary, looked down at the slave with bored contempt. "Calvus's treaty is peace, slave. Back to your scrolls." Lysander pushed the oilcloth into Cassius's hand, the small hard lump within unmistakable. "This is proof of a fraudulent identity. The woman is not Caelia. She is a tool of war. But if you will not take this message to the general himself. Tell him the ghost of Junius demands his audience." The mention of Junius's name was the thunderclap. Cassius froze. The name was taboo, known only among the highest command staff and the administrative personnel who archived the sealed reports. It was impossible for this humble slave to know that name. Cassius's hand clenched around the hidden proof. The centurion's gaze snapped from contempt to immediate lethal calculation. He knew that for a slave to utter that name was either madness or vital truth. The consequence of ignoring a threat associated with Numa's greatest burden was unthinkable. Cassius grabbed Lysander by the tunic, pulling him into the shadow of the armory door. The slave had forced the general's hand. The direction of the story and the fragile peace had just violently shifted. Centurion Cassius did not wait for the morning. He brought Lysander, bound but not harmed, directly to Numa's private quarters. Numa, already awake and clad in simple, practical tunic, listened in absolute silence as Cassius relayed the slave's incoherent babbling, ending with the chilling phrase, "The ghost of Junius demands his audience." The blood drained from Numa's face. He waved Cassius out instantly, leaving the archived slave standing before him, say small and terrified but resolute. Numa picked up the papyrus slip Lysander had provided. He unfolded it, recognizing the archival ink and the precision of the ancient Thracian names. He read the contradiction. The real Caelia was executed 5 years ago. "Explain this, slave," Numa commanded, his voice unnervingly calm, the sound of ice cracking. Lysander, finding courage in the immediacy of the threat, spoke quickly, detailing his observation at Calvus's reception. The obscure dialect, the signal on the wrist, the warrior's tension beneath the silk. "General, she is not a treaty. She is an instrument. She is trained professional. Senator Calvus has been misled, or worse, he is part of a plan to introduce a deep-cover agent into Rome." Numa dropped the document. The implications were staggering. If Caelia was an impostor and an agent, her goal wasn't peace, it was destabilization. A successful Thracian infiltration meant the king, supposedly broken by the loss of his daughter, was instead playing a calculated long game. The entire foundation of the current Roman policy was built on a lie. His mind raced through the protocols. Informing the emperor risked panic and exposure. Confronting Calvus risked a political schism that could tear the Senate apart. Numa realized the full scope of the danger. Caelia must be targeting someone specific, someone high enough to inflict the greatest wound. The only way to find her target was to monitor her movements without alerting her handlers or Calvus. Numa looked at Lysander, the shivering, ink-stained witness. The general despised the political necessity that had allowed this deception to reach the heart of Rome. But he respected the slave's cold courage and intelligence. "You have given me a great risk, Lysander," Numa stated, retrieving the scroll about Junius and burning it swiftly in the brazier. "The Senate and Calvus must believe the treaty is secure. You will return to the archives. You will speak of this to no one, not even your daughter. I will use you to track the details only you can find in the official records. You are now the eyes of the Praetorium inside the Senate's shadow." Lysander swallowed, understanding the deadly bargain. If Numa failed, they both lost their lives. The general was now racing against time, needing to verify Caelia's objective before she could act. The clock was ticking, not toward a treaty ratification, but towards a violent confrontation Numa had desperately tried to avoid. The confrontation erupted 3 days later, not in the Senate, but in a forgotten storage room beneath the Temple of Vesta. Lysander, meticulously cross-referencing Caelia's fabricated biographical data with ancient temple layouts, had discovered a small, specific piece of architecture mentioned in a Thracian military manual, a hidden passage leading directly into the temple's inner sanctum, the repository of Rome's sacred standards and the imperial treasury. Caelia was not aiming for a senator. She was aiming for the symbolic and financial heart of Rome. Numa moved with silent, devastating speed, deploying a small, loyal cohort under the guise of an inspection. He found Caelia not in the silks of a princess, but in dark leather, armed with a short, polished dagger waiting in the passage for the midnight change of guards. She had been betrayed by the obsessive focus of a low-ranking slave. Numa entered the cramped space alone, his gladius sheathed. He wanted the truth, not a meaningless skirmish. Caelia, her face now stripped of all gentle affectation, was pure steel. "You are not Caelia," Numa stated, his voice flat. The woman smiled, a sharp, humorless movement of her lips. "I am the pain the king sent. General, you may call me Eris. Your goal is the temple's treasury. My goal," Eris corrected, stepping forward, her dagger glinting, "is to prove that Rome's peace is as fragile as its honor, to wound Rome as Rome wounded my king." "The king lost his daughter. That wound is real," Numa pressed, watching her eyes for any flicker of true grief. "He lost nothing compared to what you will lose," she spat, her Thracian accent now thick with hostility. "You brought war to our gates for 20 years. You killed our families, destroyed our customs, and forced us to trade life for your law. You celebrated when my true sister, the real Caelia, was lost in the chaos of your occupation. This treaty is a mockery." Numa stepped closer, forcing the emotional pressure. "You were sent to incite war. You planned to be captured, to die here as a martyr, and turn the Thracian king into a righteous avenger." Eris hesitated, the depth of her sacrifice revealed. "My king knew I would never return. But if Rome falls to internal chaos, that is a better victory than any battlefield could offer. Do you know Senator Calvus intends to use your supposed love for Rome to gain favor with the emperor? You are a disposable pawn, not a righteous sword." Eris flinched. The thought of her sacrifice serving the vanity of a Roman politician was clearly a deeper cut than her impending death. "Your father," Numa continued, using the emotional truth as a weapon, "believes he is sending a message of pain, but you are about to be consumed by Calvus's greed. You will die for nothing." The cold, hard truth of her betrayal hit Eris with physical force. Her mission had been pure. The politics surrounding it were filth. Numa had dismantled the foundation of her entire sacrifice. The dagger trembled in her hand. The silence was deafening. Eris, the deadly agent, realized she was about to be used by the very system she was meant to destroy. The fallout was immediate and contained with military precision by Numa. Eris, recognizing the futility of her mission once exposed, yielded the dagger. She was not executed. A public execution would have given the Thracian king the martyr he desired. Instead, she was classified as a high-value intelligence asset and vanished into the impenetrable security of a Roman fortress, a secret Numa would carry to his grave. Senator Calvus, however, was destroyed. Numa did not expose the full plot. He didn't need to. He simply provided the Senate with the contradictory archival proof Lysander had found, linking the falsified lineage directly to Calvus's administrative staff, suggesting extreme negligence and treasonous incompetence in handling a major treaty. Calvus, unable to defend himself without exposing the entire dangerous deception, which would have implicated Rome for accepting the fraud, was politically crippled. His reputation shattered, his power evaporated. He was stripped of his consulship and left to face the public humiliation of his failure. The ultimate fate for a Roman politician. The price of truth was high for everyone involved. Numa, having ruptured the Senate's political structure, drew fierce, silent enmity from Calvus's allies. His duty was fulfilled, but his isolation deepened. He had saved Rome from a war, but he had lost what little political comfort he held. Lysander, the humble archive slave, found himself in a terrifying new reality. Numa, knowing the slave possessed explosive knowledge, could not release him, nor could he allow him to remain a public slave subject to Calvus's potential revenge. Lysander was summoned back to Numa's praetorium. The general stood over his campaign maps. "Lysander, you have exposed a profound danger and prevented war. Rome is indebted to you." Lysander only saw the trap. "My debt is only to my daughter, General, not to Rome." Numa nodded, acknowledging the profound truth. "Ilara cannot stay in the slave quarters beneath the archives. If Calvus seeks revenge, he will find her first." The separation was inevitable. Numa arranged for Ilara to be placed secretly within a Vestal orphanage outside the city walls, under a new name, and the direct, though covert, protection of his own trusted cohort. She was safe, provided for, educated, but Lysander could not see her. He had traded his daughter's close presence for her life. Lysander, promoted internally as Numa's private, trusted archivist, now lived and worked in the praetorium basement. He had gained status and protection, but lost his daily comfort. He was a historian of shadows, perpetually aware of the immense, deadly mechanism of the empire he now served. He was safe, but utterly alone. The world was righted, but the personal wounds were deeper than before. 2 years passed in the sterile quiet of the praetorium basement. Lysander's life had become one of intellectual rigor and profound emotional discipline. He handled military correspondence, analyzed coded communications, and became Numa's unspoken conscience, the one man who knew the true cost of the general's decisions. He had exchanged his fear for authority, his anonymity for dangerous proximity to power. Numa, softened slightly by the unexpected moral challenge Lysander presented, found a rare form of partnership. He did not treat Lysander as a slave, but as a trusted consultant, an essential pivot point. Numa was no less ruthless in his defense of Rome, but the memory of Eris's justified anger and Lysander's sacrifice ensured that every strategic decision was now weighed with a deeper human cost. The ghosts of the Dacian siege and the false Thracian treaty had forged a strange, necessary bond between the general and the archivist. One cold winter afternoon, Numa summoned Lysander. He handed the archivist a small, worn tabula, not a report, but a document of emancipation. "Your service to Rome has been repaid," Numa stated simply. "You are free, Lysander. You will remain here as a paid citizen consultant. Your daughter remains protected. You may write to her, and once a year, under my personal guard, you may visit the convent." Tears, long forbidden, welled in Lysander's eyes. Freedom was not a sudden release into sunshine, but a quiet, hard-won dignity. He was no longer bound by fear, but by choice. He chose to stay, bound by the fragile hope that he could continue to whisper the truth into the ear of the man who held the fate of millions. He accepted the sacrifice of distant love for permanent security. His first act as a free man was to write a letter to Ilara, detailing not the horrors of the empire, but the beauty of the old scrolls of history and law, reminding her that even in the darkest stone foundations, truth could be found and wielded. He knew she was thriving, her fragile health replaced by the resilience of a child raised under protection. Their separation was the foundation of her new life. Later that evening, Numa watched Lysander organize a new set of scrolls, a free man in the general's service. The general had faced war, honor, and betrayal, but the deepest transformation had come from an invisible slave who proved that true strength lay not in the legions, but in the unwavering commitment to a painful truth. The Republic endured, not through cynical politics, but through the desperate moral choices of the broken men who served it. Hope was not loud, it was the quiet scratch of a free man's pen. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one.